Welcome back to my channel. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. It's great to have you here. The afternoon sun rested gently on the clear surface of the pool, where the light rippled and danced as though it had secrets to tell. Around the edges, laughter drifted, children splashed, and the hum of summer filled the air. Yet in that sea of ordinary sounds, something extraordinary stirred, a quiet story that began not with words, but with a glance. For sometimes it is not the great declarations that begin a love, but the simple, unplanned meeting of two souls who never expected to find each other. He had been there for quite some time, his arms cutting through the water with a rhythm that spoke of both practice and solitude. His strokes were strong, but his eyes carried something gentler, something that suggested he swam not only to train his body, but to calm his restless mind. She arrived quietly, slipping into the water with a grace that turned the ordinary act of swimming into something near poetic. The pool was wide, the water deep, yet fate has a way of narrowing spaces when hearts are meant to notice one another. It was not dramatic, no sudden collision, no grand announcement. It was a glance, quick, almost shy, yet powerful enough to stop time for the briefest second. She looked up as he reached the pool's edge, and their eyes met with a spark neither expected. That one look carried 1,000 unsaid words, and though the water around them rippled, the world itself seemed to still. It is curious how one fleeting connection can feel like recognition, as though two hearts have known each other long before they actually meet. She smiled, softly, a smile not intended to charm, but one born of surprise and kindness. He returned it with equal honesty, his lips curving as though they had found a secret worth keeping. In that small exchange, the atmosphere shifted. The pool, once filled with the noise of strangers, now became their shared stage, the rest of the world fading as though it had stepped back to allow this first moment of recognition. There was no conversation at first, for words seemed unnecessary. Instead, it was the silent rhythm of two swimmers whose laps somehow began to align. Each time they reached the opposite end, they found themselves glancing, then quickly looking away, only to risk another look again. It was a quiet dance, one not rehearsed but entirely natural, as though destiny itself had choreographed the strokes and pauses, the breaths and silences. In such beginnings, one feels both wonder and hesitation. For the heart beats faster not only with excitement, but with the fear of what this meeting could mean. Neither of them spoke, yet in their silence there was a language more intimate than speech. She could sense his curiosity, his warmth hidden behind a quiet strength. He, in turn, felt her presence as a lightness, an energy that lifted the air around them. And so the afternoon unfolded, not with dramatic gestures, but with the steady building of connection. When at last he found himself standing by the edge, catching his breath, she swam over, her eyes lifting toward his in gentle courage. Their conversation began not with perfect words, but with the easy exchange of names, laughter at the simple coincidences of their day, and the comfort of realizing how natural it felt to speak to one another. For love often begins just so, not in thunder, not in fire, but in the quiet certainty that someone you barely know has already altered the rhythm of your world. A glance across the water, a smile shared between strokes, a meeting that should have been fleeting but instead promises something lasting. Such is the power of chance when two souls carried by the flow of life collide not by accident but by design. And from that single glance, everything changed. There is something both delicate and thrilling about the very first spark of love, that moment when two hearts, almost shy of admitting their own feelings, begin to beat in a rhythm that is far louder than words could ever confess. It was not enough that they had met by chance at the poolside, not enough that their eyes had found each other across the shimmering water. What followed was even more stirring, for the smallest gestures, the faintest laughs, and the most fleeting smiles began to shape something that neither could deny, though both tried, in their quiet ways, to disguise. Their conversations at first were brief, carried on in the pauses between laps, exchanged while catching their breath or resting on the edge of the pool. Each word seemed to matter, not because of its importance, but because of who it was spoken to. His voice, steady yet unsure, carried the warmth of someone discovering trust where he did not expect it. Her laughter, soft and genuine, came like sunlight slipping through the leaves, illuminating the ordinary and making it extraordinary. How quickly the sound of her laughter became the rhythm he waited for, and how naturally his words began to seek her smile, as though it were the only answer worth hearing. There is a peculiar sweetness in first love, the way it carries both boldness and fear in the same breath. Their hearts raced, not merely from swimming, but from the anticipation of every encounter, from the question of whether the other would feel the same quickening of the pulse, the same soft trembling of hope. They shared glances that lingered a little too long, then broke away with a sudden blush, only to be drawn back again by a pull stronger than reason. It was a quiet surrender to a force they had no wish to resist. They began to linger after practice, walking together toward the benches where the day softened into evening. She would tell him stories, little pieces of her life, not in a practiced way, but with the trust of someone who believed he would understand. He listened with an attention that was rare, as though every word mattered more than the world around them. And when he spoke, she leaned closer, not only to hear, but because her heart had already begun to lean toward him in ways she could not explain. Shy smiles gave way to playful teasing, and laughter became their shared language. He would challenge her to swim just one more lap, pretending to race though letting her win, and she would laugh, accusing him of holding back, though she secretly cherished his quiet chivalry. These simple exchanges carried more weight than they realized. They were not merely playing at the water's edge, but weaving the first threads of affection, creating memories that would linger long after the ripples in the pool had stilled. Every look began to hold a question, unspoken yet understood. Could this be love? Could something so small already feel so large? For in the beginning, love does not roar. It whispers, it nudges, it teases. It builds not from certainty, but from the delicious uncertainty that makes every moment feel like discovery. Their hearts, though inexperienced in this particular language, learned quickly, beating faster than their strokes, carried not by fear but by wonder. The beauty of that spark lay in its innocence, in its refusal to be rushed. They did not speak of forever, nor did they weigh their future with heavy promises. Instead, they allowed themselves to exist in that perfect present, where a smile could carry a lifetime's worth of meaning, and a single touch of hands while passing a water bottle could send ripples through the soul. It is in such beginnings that love feels the purest, when it needs no adornment, no grand display. It is enough that they laughed together, that they found joy in each other's company, and that the world seemed lighter simply because the other was in it. And so, with every shy smile and every burst of laughter, with every racing heart and every quiet glance, their story truly began. The days grew longer, and with them came the gentle comfort of familiarity, the kind that makes two people forget there was ever a time they were strangers. After their swims, they often found themselves drawn not to the rush of the world beyond the gates, but to the quiet embrace of the poolside, where the water stilled and the sun stretched across the sky in golden hues. It was there, on warm benches and shaded steps, that they began to uncover more than just names and smiles. They discovered dreams, fragile, hopeful, sometimes uncertain, spoken aloud for the very first time because they had found someone willing to listen. She would talk about the places she longed to see, her voice carrying both wonder and hesitation. Paris at dawn, the streets of Florence, the mountains she had only traced with her finger on maps. She shared her hope of writing, though she blushed to admit it, as though her dreams were too delicate to expose. He listened as though her words painted the sky itself, nodding not in polite agreement, but in genuine belief. To him, her dreams were not fanciful, they were treasures waiting to be realized, and in his eyes she saw the reflection of someone who thought her capable of far more than she ever allowed herself to believe. In return, he spoke of his own hopes, though more cautiously at first. He admitted his struggles, the doubts that clung to him when he was alone, the fear of being ordinary in a world that demanded greatness. But when she leaned closer, resting her chin in her hand, eyes bright with curiosity, he found himself saying more than he ever intended. He confessed his dream of becoming more than just a swimmer, of building something lasting, though he had not yet decided what shape it should take. And as he spoke, she did not laugh, nor did she turn away. Instead, she encouraged him, reminding him that dreams do not need to be perfect to be worth chasing. The sun became their silent witness, casting its warmth over the poolside as they pieced together the fragile beginnings of trust. Secrets slipped into the conversation as naturally as the breeze that stirred the leaves. She told him about the loneliness that sometimes followed her, even in a crowded room, and how she longed for someone who would not just hear her words, but understand her silences. He confessed the weight of expectations pressed upon him, the fear of failing those who believed in him. These were not confessions given lightly, for each carried the risk of vulnerability. Yet with each secret shared, the bond between them deepened, for nothing binds two souls quite like the courage of honesty. They would laugh too when the conversation grew heavy, finding lightness in small things. The way her hair curled when it dried in the sun, the way his jokes sometimes stumbled but still made her laugh, the way the world around them seemed to fade until only their voices remained. Those afternoons became their refuge, a pocket of time where reality softened and dreams felt not only possible but near. It is a rare and beautiful thing to find another soul with whom one can lay bare both hope and fear without fear of judgment. Their conversations were not always grand. Often they were simple, about favorite books, childhood memories, or how the stars might look once night arrived. Yet beneath the simplicity was something profound, a growing certainty that they had found in each other the rare companion who made the act of dreaming feel safe. The calm waters mirrored the sun, and in that reflection they seemed to see not only the world around them, but a glimpse of the world they might build together. They did not yet call it love, perhaps out of caution, perhaps out of youth, but already their hearts knew the truth. For what is love if not the sharing of one's truest self in the quiet company of another? And so, under the warmth of the sun and the stillness of the water, their dreams were no longer solitary, but shared. There comes a moment in every tender story when the sweetness of discovery meets the weight of uncertainty, when the heart that once beat only in excitement begins to tremble at the thought of loss. For them, it arrived quietly, as most shadows do, creeping in not through arguments or unkindness, but through the simple pull of life, tugging them in different directions. He was offered opportunities that demanded more of his time, more of his strength, and she found herself faced with choices that could not be delayed. What had once been endless afternoons by the water now became hurried conversations, promises made between glances, and the aching awareness that every moment together might be shorter than the one before. Love, in its beginning, feels invincible, carried on laughter and unspoken certainty, but when the prospect of separation emerges, it takes on a sharper form, Their hearts, which had once raced in joy, now beat with the fear of being left behind. He would watch her as she spoke about her plans, smiling as he always had, yet a shadow lingered in his eyes, betraying the thought he dared not voice. What if she went on without him? She, too, felt the weight of change, the fear that his growing commitments might lead him somewhere she could not follow. Yet neither wished to burden the other with doubt, so they smiled a little longer, held one another a little tighter, as though strength alone might keep the tide from rising. The water, once their sanctuary, began to feel different. Where it had carried their laughter, it now carried their silences. They still swam, still raced to the far end of the pool, but the pauses between strokes grew heavier. Their conversations lingered less on dreams and more on what-ifs. What if the distance grew too wide? What if the world demanded they choose between ambition and affection? These were questions they could not answer, and yet they hovered over every embrace, every promise whispered as the sun dipped below the horizon. It is in such moments that love reveals its truest strength, for affection untested is only half formed. The fear of losing each other did not diminish what they had. Instead, it sharpened it, made every look more urgent, every touch more sacred. They learned to speak in smaller ways, through a hand pressed a little longer, through the silence that carried more than words. And though uncertainty frightened them, it also proved that what they held was real, for only something deeply cherished can awaken such a profound fear of absence. They tried to imagine futures where distance did not matter, where love could stretch itself across miles and days without faltering. He spoke of writing letters, of finding her no matter where she went. She promised she would wait, that no matter how far he swam into the currents of his own life, she would be there at the shore. These vows, fragile yet fierce, became their anchor, a way to fight against the storm that threatened to pull them apart. Yet even as they clung to hope, doubt remained, whispering in the quiet hours. She wondered if his world might grow so wide that it left no room for her. He wondered if her dreams might carry her so far that he became only a memory. And still, despite it all, they chose each other again and again, not with certainty but with courage. The beauty of their love was not in its ease, but in its resilience. For even as life pulled them apart, they held on with the quiet strength of two souls unwilling to surrender. They did not know what the future would bring, but they knew this. The fear of losing each other was itself proof of how deeply they had already been found. And so, though the waters grew rough and the distance widened, their love fought to stay afloat. There comes a time in every tender bond when the heart must learn the lesson it resists the most, that love is not only measured by how tightly we can hold on, but also by the grace with which we let go when it becomes necessary. For them, this moment arrived slowly, like the tide creeping over the shore, impossible to ignore though neither wished to face it. Their love had grown from glances, from laughter, from shared secrets under the sun, and it had endured the fear of distance. Yet life, relentless and unyielding, placed before them a choice neither wanted to make. His path pulled him toward obligations that demanded his whole self, while hers urged her to chase dreams that would not wait. To cling too tightly meant to stifle what each of them was meant to become, yet to release felt almost unbearable. They sat together one evening by the quiet waters where so much of their story had unfolded, and the silence between them was different than before. It was not the comfortable quiet of shared understanding, nor the nervous hush of beginnings. It was the heavy pause of hearts weighing what they knew must be spoken. She looked at him with eyes that carried both love and sorrow, and he reached for her hand as though by touch alone he might delay the truth. Yet even then they both understood. Real love cannot exist only for its own sake. It must sometimes step aside for the sake of the one it cherishes. He was the first to speak, though his voice trembled with restraint. He told her that she deserved to follow her dreams, to see the places she had always longed for, to become everything she had whispered to him under the sun. He said he could not bear to be the reason she stayed when her heart was calling her elsewhere. She wanted to protest, to insist that love was reason enough to remain, but in her heart she knew his words were not born of rejection, but of devotion. For only one who loves deeply can sacrifice the comfort of presence for the promise of another's fulfillment. Her reply was no easier. She told him that his path, with all its demands and expectations, was one he was meant to walk. She confessed her fear of holding him back, of becoming the chain that weighed down the swimmer who was meant to cut through waters far beyond her reach. It was not that she wished to let him go. It was that she could not bear to see his dreams shrink for her sake. And so she, too, placed love not in the clinging, but in the release, trusting that what they had built would remain even as life pulled them apart. The tears that followed were not of anger, nor even of despair, but of the bittersweet ache that comes with knowing love is true even when it cannot remain as it once was. They sat in silence, their hands still clasped, both mourning what they were about to lose and honoring what they had found. It is a strange paradox that love can feel strongest in the very moment it chooses sacrifice, that letting go can sometimes reveal more devotion than holding on ever could. As the evening settled into night, they did not make grand speeches or sweeping promises. Instead, they exchanged words soft and sincere, that they would carry each other in memory, that they would not regret what had been, that they would be grateful for the joy they had known. There was no bitterness, only the quiet understanding that love had asked something greater of them than they had ever imagined, and they had answered with courage. For the power of sacrifice lies not in forgetting, nor in pretending love never was, but in honoring it enough to give it freedom. And though their paths would diverge, each carried within them the proof that love, when true, is not diminished by distance or absence, but transformed into something eternal. And so they learned that love's truest strength is not always in the holding, but in the letting go. Time, with all its quiet insistence, moved forward as it always does. Their paths diverged, their lives unfolded in different directions, yet the love they once shared refused to vanish like a fleeting season. It settled instead into the very fabric of their beings, woven into the memories they carried, etched into the places they had touched together. Though the days of swimming side by side and sharing dreams beneath the sun were no longer theirs to live, the promise they made remained unbroken, that what they had discovered in each other would not be lost to time. It was not a promise spoken with dramatic vows, nor written in ink to bind them. It was simpler, quieter, born in those moments when their eyes met and both knew, without words, that they had found something rare. They promised in the way they held each other's gaze, in the laughter that lingered long after it ended, in the tears shed when they chose sacrifice over possession. And, though life carried them forward, further apart than either wished, those promises endured, not because they forced them to, but because the memory of love is too powerful to be undone. He would find himself at pools again years later, the scent of chlorine and the gentle lapping of water pulling forth a flood of recollections. He would close his eyes and remember her smile, the way it shone brighter than sunlight on the ripples, and for a moment it was as though she were still there, sitting at the edge, her laughter soft and familiar. She, too, would encounter echoes of him in unexpected places, a song drifting from a cafe, a phrase spoken in the same steady tone as his, or the glimmer of water catching light in just the right way. And in those fleeting instants, she felt the warmth of what once was, not with pain, but with gratitude, for promises that last forever are not measured by proximity or possession. They live instead in the heart, where time cannot erase them. What they gave each other in those tender days was more than a fleeting romance. It was a truth that shaped them. He carried her encouragement into every challenge he faced, remembering how she had believed in him when he faltered. She carried his devotion into every journey she took, remembering how he had let her go not out of weakness, but out of love. In this way, though distance separated them, they remained together in all that mattered most. It is the nature of love to leave traces, and theirs lingered in the smallest details. Every ripple of water reminded them of their beginnings, each glimmer of sunlight on the surface reflecting not just the present but the past they cherished. And while others might have called their story unfinished, they knew it was complete in its own way, for not every love is meant to end in permanence of presence. Some are meant to teach, to shape, to leave behind a memory that comforts even as time moves on. Yet it would be untrue to say they never longed for more. There were nights when he wished he could hear her laughter once again, when she wished she could feel his steady hand at her side. But even in the ache of missing, there was solace, for the love they had known remained untarnished, untouched by bitterness. It lived not in what they lost, but in what they had given each other: hope, courage, tenderness, and the belief that such love, once found, can never truly be lost. So the years carried them forward, as years always do, but the promise held. It whispered in quiet moments, it echoed in familiar places, and it reminded them that even if time drifted them apart, their story had not ended. It lived on, not in shared days, but in lasting memory, and in the ripples that spread outward from a love too deep to fade. And so, even as life carried them down separate currents, the memory of their love remained in every ripple of the water. Thank you for joining me on this beautiful journey of love, hope, and sacrifice. Every glance, every smile, every dream, and every promise leaves on in the ripples of the water. May these stories remind us all of the power of love that never fades. If this touched your heart, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and make sure to subscribe for more heartfelt English stories with me.